one is Ida, right, from KTH. And she's going to present on communication in engineering education, a new way of looking at integrated learning activities and forms of communication.
Thank you. I have a background of a master's degree in engineering and in education. That's my background. This is a part of my thesis work I did at the autumn semester 2010. It's a part of that. And as the title says, I'm going to talk about communication in engineering education, how to integrate it in the learning activity together with the subject. And just something to start with that we have in mind, what we mean about integrated learning activities. It's the subject, content, and skills together in some content or in some sort. So it's about the red circle I will talk, or what's inside the red circle today. You can look at integrated communication in two ways. First, the purpose of why we're doing this, and then the way of how we're doing it. And together, I will first talk about this model that I write about in the thesis, and then about what the teacher think can do at KTH. It was a little bit of the study also. So we look at it two ways. If you read literature, you can read about writing to learn or learning to write. It's two different. I large this up and talk about communication. You can communication to learn. You use communication as a way of learning tool. By talking to each other or writing things, you learn knowledge and so on. Or you can learn to communicate, to be a good speaker, to be a good presentator, good writer, and so on. It's two different ways. You can be somewhere in the middle of these two. And the new thing I add is if you integrate in a passive or active way. I'm going to talk about it later, maybe you understand. The passive way, if you have a course, for example, that you have a written exam that testing all the knowledge the student have, and maybe a lab report or an oral presentation that you also add to the course. But it's just a small part of the course, and they learn some communication because they have a report or presentation, but they learn the subject by the side in the exam. In the active way, at the opposite, it's more active, it's more integrated, more together. You can't really separate the communication training from the knowledge training. And maybe in the passive part is maybe not even written in the curriculum. They just talk when they are studying a subject. I will show you, because these two ways together, these two perspectives together, you can see it's 4 areas and 4 different types of learning activities, I have called them. The first one, if you're learning to communicate in an active way, I call it real-life communication. Maybe you have a project, you give your student a project, and they should write an abstract of the result or present it for a board. A little bit role-playing, maybe. This is just example. Maybe you have something else to add. But I have chosen these words just illustrate why or what's including in this. In this book, to learn to communicate, and in a passive way, I call it unspecified communication. When you ask your students to write a report, write a lab report, you have no aim for the lab report, no receiver, or not so specified what they're going to write and how, in what way. The passive communicate to learn, I have illustrate with group tasks, with focus on the contents. You give your student a home assignment, and they can work together with it. then they communicate a lot to solve the problem, but we do not think, maybe don't think it's a passive way to train them communicate, and they use to communicate for learning. And on the other side, active learning or peer learning. The teacher may do something active on the lecture also. So this is just the whole model that I have talked about. As a part of my thesis study, I also interview some teachers about that. How do you think about communication, and how do they use it in their education, in the courses? It's a teacher from the first cycle, the bachelor cycle, the first 3 years on courses over different parts of K-8. The doing, what they did, I didn't show them this figure, but we talk about it for an hour and a half with each of the teachers, and they talk about, well, we have communication in our courses. They write some reports, and I ask what kind of reports. Well, maybe just some words in the lab reports, but it was not given to whom they are writing. Maybe the same student as in the class or something, but it was very unspecified what they were doing. No guidelines, just write a report, have a presentation oral in the class. They have no guidelines. So it was maybe hard for the student to know how to be better. The thinking, the students know what this is, and they know what they should do, but they don't. Maybe in the beginning, well, they can ask questions on the lecture, but it was not so common. But they think it was a good idea to have this kind of learning tools. I ask students the questions during the lectures. They think but when you ask them a little bit more about that, it's, well, they don't answer in the first. So after the first 2 lectures, I just go on as regular. But they think that there's something good in there. Well, we have 2 blocks left, and I call them the need of development blocks. First, the real-life communication. The teacher doesn't. We talk about it a little bit when I interview them, and I said, maybe have you think about to ask them to write a paper or something more strict, short or long, or have a presentation to sell the idea or the results? No, I haven't, but that is a good idea. So it's not hard from unspecified communication to change to real life. It may be not that hard. Also, the group task, we focus on context. The teacher says, well, I give them a home assignment, and they can, if they want, to solve it in group, or they solve it by their own. So it's 2 different type of development we need to do. First, maybe change unspecified communication to more real-life communication. We know from the study that a lot of unspecified communication are happening in the university. And maybe to provide our students with even better communicators, we need some real-life communication, some change in the instruction about how they're going to read or write. And the group task, maybe it's also easy. They do a lot of home assignment, the reading before the lectures, the working. Maybe the teacher can ask the student work in pairs, discuss this more proactive. And why do I speak about this? Well, I think that to be a good engineer, you have to be able to communicate, and you have to have the opportunity during your study time to try all of these boxes. And I also argue that it's not so hard to get these two red boxes that I'm talking about now, if we want. And this tool also may be good to use when we talk about what do we need to develop. It's an easy way to see the many types of communication we can add into regular courses. That was my presentation, I think. Yes, it was.
is obvious that communication is an important CDIO skill, being part of personal or interpersonal communication. You could say, when you say there's something which is unspecified communication, then there is a problem, because specification has, or communication has to be specified in some way. Otherwise, we do not tell the student what to do. So it seems that the main challenge here is to help the teachers to stage. You talked about report. To stage the report, so the report goes away from being something which is unspecified into what is real-life communication. And could you say something about how can you do it as a teacher? What can you do to specify the report you ask the students to write?
When I talked to the teacher, they said, well, they write a report, but I don't think the texts are so necessarily. They're just writing the result from the lab. This was a chemistry lab. And I asked, why don't you ask the students to maybe write a very short report, like they should write to a boss in a company later on. And they have to think, what is this result and why is it important? And then we go from a lab report that's quite boring to write, and you're just going to write what you did the hour before, to something that you have to start to think, why am I doing this? And is it right? Is my value okay? And then you have to start to think more. I think we have to do more real-life communication. And it's more fun for the student, I guess.
But you can ask students to write reports for two purposes. And one purpose is there is somebody who has to read the report, but there's another very, very important aspect with respect to writing, and that is when you write something, it clarifies your mind.
Yes.
And we shall not ignore that the students can learn a lot about chemistry or about what they have done by writing it down formally, although there's not really anybody who has to read the report.
I think a mix of these four are good. I don't think that every task should be a real-life communication. Sometimes you have just to write a report, just to try to understand something in that way. I think you have to do all of these four parts of communication. That's my opinion, my thinking about this.
Okay. So what would be a good task as unspecified communication?
Well, that's maybe a first presentation task is just to help the students to be able to standing and talk about things. Then maybe you don't want them to be focused on, okay, I'm going to sell this idea or something. Just the first year maybe they should just be able to stand in front of the class, hold the oral presentation, and then the form is not the necessary thing. It's just to be able to communicate to a bigger group, for example.
Can I ask you to extend outside your presentation and ask you a question about that? I can see how I can map the formal communication things that our students do, writing a report, giving an oral presentation, maybe do some, but it's the informal things, learning to discuss and negotiate and persuade, convince and advise, all those things that I find it difficult to teach formally. So have you have any comment to make on how active approaches we might take to help students develop their informal
you can find tasks in the active parts that are a discussion, maybe a discussion panel during a smaller lecture. If you have a class of 30 students, they can discuss and you assist, and they prepare pro et contra discussion or something like that, and we can have it in a quite formal way. But the discussion and the talking maybe are more like the passive way. I don't say that passive way is a bad way. I think it's good also.
Yeah, I think so.
We've got 5 more minutes. One question from me. Is it done, how is it done in KTH? Because do you expect, say, a mechanics faculty to also teach this? Or is it done together with language?
No, we work as the idea at KTH are that mechanical teachers should also teach communication, and then they say, no, I can't correct the language. Well, if you have a real life communication, maybe the teacher from mechanical do not need to correct spelling mistake. But if is it a paper that is writing to sell, or is it just some word in some order? Then the teacher in the subject can correct even the language part or the way of communication. If it's not in correct wording or correct writing sentences, but is it communicating in the right way, in the right direction, and something you're going to use later on. So I think it's this real life is also a possibility for the subject teacher to be more able to assess communication also.
But do the two work together?
No, no, unfortunately not. The language department is quite small also.
Okay, understand. Any last question? Okay, shall we thank you, Jeff?
Thank you.